An enemy's enemy can prove to be a good friend. Well, that certainly seems to be coming true in the case of North Korea. Russian President Vladimir Putin and his US counterpart Joe Biden and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. As Moscow has extended its support to Washington's arch-enemy Pyongyang, the Putin regime has accused the Biden administration of testing its ally Kim Jong-un's patience. Russia's Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs has told the state-run media, and I'm quoting, Moscow prefers a diplomatic approach towards the Korean Peninsula. It is evident that the US and its allies in the region prefer a different path. It's as if Pyongyang's patience is being tested. Now, the statement comes after North Korea fired an intercontinental ballistic missile. The South Korean military claiming that the missile flew 1,000 kilometers at an altitude of 6,100 kilometers. The missile is believed to have landed in Japan's exclusive economic zone. Calling the test missile absolutely unacceptable, Japan claims that the weapon may have had the range to hit the US mainland as well. North Korea had already warned America of a fiercer military action. In response to Pyongyang's second missile test in 2 days, Tokyo and Washington held joint military drills in the airspace over the Sea of Japan. However, Kim Jong-un and some of his allies, including Putin, find these joint military exercises a provocation. In fact, Kim Jong-un has fired scores of ballistic missiles this year. The number is far more than any other year's record. The North Korean missiles have also triggered a rare air raid warning in Japan. Kim's test missiles are worrying Joe Biden as his administration fears that North Korea would soon carry out its 7th nuclear test. And other than raising the issue with the South Korean and Japanese leaders, the US president has discussed Kim Jong-un's recent missile tests with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping as well. And now with Putin extending his support to Kim Jong-un and accusing the Biden administration of testing Kim Jong-un's patience, this could heighten the tensions in the Korean Peninsula to a whole new level. For more on this, with me on the broadcast is Alexander Zebin, who is the director of the Center for Korean Studies at the Russian Academy of Sciences in Moscow. Thanks very much for being here. What is your assessment of the current situation in the Korean Peninsula and the Russian statement, its continuing support for North Korea? What do you think Moscow is trying to do here?
Russia's consistent position is that by sanctions only, it is not possible to solve the North Korean nuclear problem. Russia for a long time advocates that both sides should have a dialogue and took into consideration, address mutual concerns on an equal basis. You know that in 2018, President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un met in Singapore and signed joint statement, which says that both countries are going to establish new relations free from past-time enmity and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, United States failed to fulfill these obligations. And North Korea has actually no other way to demonstrate that North Korea is ready to defend itself if America is going to pursue the previous policy of regime change in this country. And according to many American think tanks and very influential scholars working for foreign establishment, it is clear that America is going to continue a sanction policy towards North Korea until economic situation in North Korea will deteriorate to the extent when Kim Jong-un will be forced to accept American conditions. Of course, North Korea is not going to comply with such plans, and North Korea just demonstrating that it has will, capacity, means, and is ready to defend its sovereignty and its interests.
Okay.
That's all. I don't think that North Korea is going to attack United States or Japan or South Korea.
Okay, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this then. What does Moscow hope to gain with this continuing support for North Korea? What's in it for Russia?
We are not going to support North Korea. We are just propose the most feasible and realistic way of solving of some very important acute international problems, nuclear problem on the Korean Peninsula. We think from the beginning that only by sanctions, by pressure, by imposing unilateral conditions by United States, this problem could not be solved. You should take into consideration security interests of the North Korea, because
sure, but the irony here being that Russia is propagating dialogue to ease the tensions in the Korean Peninsula while it continues to attack Ukraine, and diplomacy and dialogue has not quite worked there.
Russia is not attacking Ukraine, if we talk to this matter. Russia is defending interests of Russian citizens who lived in Ukraine and were subject to genocide and hostile policy of current Ukrainian authorities, who were brought to power as a result of anti-state coup. And actually realize on Ukraine not interest of the Ukrainian people, but interest of American hosts.
All right, we are leaving it there for the moment. Thanks very much for joining us on the broadcast. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, let's also get in a perspective from South Korea. With me on the broadcast is Robert Kelly, who is a political analyst on inter-Korean affairs. Thanks very much for being here on the broadcast. How do you react to Russia siding with North Korea when it comes to these missile tests, and at the same time blaming the US for the rise in tensions in the Korean Peninsula?
So I think the Russians for a long time, I mean, even back to when, the Soviet Union existed, 30 years ago, the Soviets used to sort of play games with the North Koreans, occasionally supporting them against the Chinese, occasionally, pulling away financial support, right? Russia and China, the Soviet Union and North Korea were always sort of like transactional or instrumental friends, the same thing between North Korea and China. And so at the moment, it's in Russia's interest to manipulate and use North Korea sort of in the larger sort of great game against the United States, particularly over North Korea, over the Ukraine war. I don't actually believe that the Russians actually trust or care for North Korea that much, right? I mean, South Korean investments in Russia, for example, particularly in its Far East, are significantly more important. Korean cars, for example, are big exports to Russia. North Korea doesn't actually export a great deal to North Korea, to Russia. Weapons, I suppose, now we hear for the Ukraine war. But really, I think the argument, the utility here is really geopolitical, which is to say the Americans are sort of very upset about the Ukraine war. And so it's useful for the Russians to kind of put their finger in the eye of the Americans by supporting North Korea over something where the Americans care, right, in these particular missile tests. But the Russians actually have a record of actually supporting the denuclearization and demissilization of North Korea, because everybody's scared about North Korea with missiles and nuclear weapons, right? Not just the Americans, the Russians too. So I think really this is just tactical and instrumental.
Right. What do you think North Korea is trying to do at this point? What message is it trying to send out to the world with this firing of these missiles?
We've all been trying to figure that out for the last 6 months. I mean, I have no great insight, over anybody else. But my sense is the North Koreans really want sort of two things from these tests. The first is they want sanctions to be rolled back. We know for a while that the North Koreans have wanted some kind of sanctions relief. And I also think they're kind of banging the drum. They're sort of beating away at this idea that we on the outside, that means specifically the US, Japan, and South Korea, accept that North Korea is a nuclear weapons state, right? North Korea is not in the NPT. It dropped out so they could build nuclear weapons. India did the same thing, right? India is also not in the NPT in order to build nuclear weapons. But, people trust India with nuclear weapons a great deal more than they trust North Korea with nuclear weapons. And so there's been a lot of reticence to sort of accept that North Korea is, in fact, entitled or allowed to be a nuclear weapon state. And the U.S. has insisted on North Korean denuclearization for a long time. And I think what's happening now is this kind of like steady escalating drumbeat to just kind of force it into our heads that they are, in fact, equipped with nuclear weapons and missiles, and there's really nothing we can do about it, and we just have to kind of give in and accept that. If we do accept that, I hope we don't just give it away. I hope we trade it for something. I hope we get something out of the North Koreans for it. But I have the feeling we're kind of getting close to the point where we just kind of give up on denuclearization because, they're never going to do it, and I think we're kind of adjusting informally already to that.
All right, Robert Kelly, we're leaving it there for the moment. Thanks very much for being here on the broadcast. WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.